For coming tonight. I know the weather's keeping a lot of people out, but thank you for being here. I got 6:02, so I'm going to go ahead and open us up in prayer, and then we'll be in 1 Samuel 5, finishing what we started last week. Let's pray. God, once again, we thank you for tonight and for the time to be together. We pray that you'd speak to us, Lord, that you'd open up your word in such a way that we grow, that we learn. Father, thank you for bringing us here safe tonight. Allow us to get home safely as well, even in the rain and the dark. And we love you, and we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Come on in. I'm sure we got a few people coming in late, but that's okay. 6:03 is my time, so let's get to it. 1 Samuel chapter 5. We spent some time last week. Gosh, doesn't last week feel like a long time ago? I mean, because I think we had Halloween was on Thursday, so that was busy. Reformation Day, if you're one of those. So busy weekend. We did a lot. You probably did a lot. But last week we looked at 1 Samuel chapter 5 and the Philistines fighting the Israelites and the Israelites losing the Ark of the Covenant, the Ark of God. It goes into the Philistine pagan temple where they worshipped Dagon, and you'll remember that that Dagon fell at least twice that we know of, fell twice in front of the Ark of the Lord, and we kind of finished that section last week, but what we did not get to was verse 6 through 12, which is kind of the end of the story, what happens. And I think it's important. A lot of people separate this. They go all the way to chapter 6 to find out what happened to the Ark of God and where it went. So we're just going to take it slowly tonight. I don't have, a big outline. I need some feedback. I need some help. But I'm going to read this to you. We'll get started. Verse 6. 1 Samuel chapter 5, verse 6, the hand of the Lord was heavy on the people of Ashdod, and he, that's God, ravaged them and struck them with tumors, both Ashdod and its territory. And when the men of Ashdod saw how it was, they said, the ark of the God of Israel must not remain with us, for his hand is harsh toward us and Dagon our God. Therefore they sent and gathered to themselves all the lords of the Philistines and said, what shall we do with the ark of the God of Israel? And they answered, let the ark of the God of Israel be carried away to Gath. So they carried the ark of the God of Israel away. So it was, after they had carried it away, that the hand of the Lord was against the city with a very great destruction. And he struck the men of the city, both great and small, and tumors broke out on them. Therefore they sent the ark of God to Ekron. So it was, as the ark of God came to Ekron, that the Ekronites cried out, saying, they have brought the ark of the God of Israel to us, to kill us and our people. So they sent and gathered together all the lords of the Philistines and said, send away the ark of the God of Israel, and let it go back to its own place, so that it does not kill us and our people. For there was a deadly destruction throughout all the city. The hand of God was very heavy there. And the men who did not die were stricken with tumors, and the cry of the city went up to heaven. So that brings us to the end of this chapter, where we find out really what has happened with the Ark of the Covenant. And so you see kind of unfold God's wrath on the Philistines and all of these outlying areas that we talk about, Ashdod and Ekron. They're all part of Philistia, or what they would have called Philistia. And so these are groups of people that worship numerous gods, multiple gods, are polytheistic. And so you finally see it. And it happened quickly, because remember, it was just at the beginning of 1 Samuel chapter 4 and into chapter 5 where the Israelites go into battle and they bring the Ark of the Covenant with them, and they lose. So it's just this really quick turnaround, it seems like, because they've lost the Ark of the Covenant. It's now in pagan hands. And what we talked about last week was the way that God dealt with pagan worshipers, the way that God responded to Israel first and their disobedience, but then to the Philistines and the people that were worshiping Dagon. And so we saw the the statue that fell down, and we talked about what that meant. And then so tonight, we kind of pick up the story where the people that are worshiping Dagon have finally said, we've got to get rid of this thing. This ark is obviously the problem. And the takeaway from last week was that they had the opportunity to worship the Lord. They had the opportunity to worship the one true God, Yahweh. It seems like they would have caught on, right? But they did not. And we talked about why people today tend to make those same mistakes. They continue to fight and not worship the God that you and I know. And so some takeaways for tonight are, what happens in the face of wickedness? How does God ultimately deal with the people of that worship Dagon, the people of Ekron, the Philistines, the Ashdodites? How did God deal with them? And so just to make it really simple, one of the points that we didn't make it to last week, but I wanted to, was that God judges wickedness, right? So these people remember what God had done through Israel, what God had done for his people, the Israelites. They knew that God had defeated armies. They knew that God had rescued his people. They speak of the Egyptians and the plagues in the wilderness, right? And so what do the plagues of 1 Samuel chapter 5, when they talk about the plagues of Egypt, what does that have to do with going into battle with the Israelites? Because they say, this is the God that has done these things. When the men of Ashdod saw how it was, they said, the ark of God must not remain with us, for his hand is harsh toward us and Dagon, our God. So they bring up this stuff that God has done in the past. What does that have to do with going into battle against him today? What do you think? I'm going to roll up my sleeves. I'm warm. What do plagues have to do with going into battle against the Israelites? Nothing?
The people in that area had heard what God had done in Egypt. Because remember when Rahab was in Jericho, she said, hey, we know it. I think the Bible even says that our heart melted like water. So they knew that God could do things for Israel.
So they make that connection. In a way, they connect God sending plagues to going into battle with the Israelites. Because you see what's happening to them. They're not losing in battle. The Philistines are not losing in battle. They have been, in their minds, victorious, and they still feel like Dagon gave them the victory. But so now they come in and they say, this is the God who brought the plagues to the Egyptians, so we want to get rid of him, right? So they make this connection. And so what the Philistines fear in chapter 4 is what's happening in chapter 5. In chapter 4, they talk about this is the God that we want to stay away from, and now it is happening. And so they're starting to understand, and the struggle for me is to know what happens in their heads. What's going through their minds? Because they're starting to connect the dots of a God that will not tolerate sin and will not tolerate pagan worship. They're starting to connect that, right? So God's holiness cannot tolerate sin. And since the Ark of the Covenant is a picture, an image of God's presence and God's holiness, what happens when that sign gets into the house of Dagon? The symbol of their God, the symbol of Dagon, is destroyed, right? Falls down on the threshold. What did they say about Dagon falling over? Do you remember this from last week? What conclusion did they come to? What happened to Dagon? The statue of Dagon. What did we say happened to it last week? Yeah, the hands and the head had broken off, so the torso is all that was left, right? All right, we talked about what that could possibly mean. But then verse 6 starts like this. The hand of the Lord was heavy on the people of Ashdod. Right? So first, God deals with this symbol of their pagan god. Okay? Some of us are going to find ourselves in circumstances where God deals with the sin or the thing, you know what I mean? God deals with the problem. Okay, so there might be things in your life that cause you to sin. There might be parts of your life that are sinful, things that we need to give over to the Lord. Sometimes God deals with those things. We talked last week about idol worship. Some of the things that we worship, some of the things that we spend way too much time thinking about. Sometimes God deals with those things, the stuff. Sometimes God deals with circumstances. I was telling Jimmy just a few minutes ago, I'm tired of car trouble. I mean, I have 4 vehicles at my house, and every one of them right now needs something. Something has happened to it. It's not running right, whatever. And I'm kind of tired. I'm tired of working on cars. I'm tired of going to shops. I'm tired of calling Travis on the phone and seeing if he can help me. And I asked at dinner tonight, I said, is it sin? Is it unconfessed sin? I hope not. I don't think so. But sometimes God works in our circumstances, right? How have you seen? Share with me. How have you seen God work in circumstances to bring you back to Him? Things. Has that happened to you ever? Can you tell me how? Is it secretive? Yeah, death. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Great loss. Yeah. Pam's talking about death. She said sometimes the death of a loved one brings you back to the Lord, right? That's common. Mm-hmm. Yep. We did Nana Ashley's funeral service in here Monday, and then they did her interment graveside service this morning. And if you weren't able to be here, I think the video's online, but it's a great service in this room. If you knew Nana Ashley, you knew it was easy. But I think just through some of the conversations that we had about Nana, a lot of people would be drawn back to the Lord, to hear her life and her story. Go ahead, Mike. You were going to say something. That's right. I think my nickname for a lot of years was Little Britches, wasn't it? So, but Mike said sometimes we get too big for our britches. You don't hear britches a whole lot anymore. Yeah. But verse 6 says, the hand of the Lord was heavy on the people of Ashdod. So listen, it starts with the stuff. At least in this account, God dealt with the false god. He dealt with the idol. He dealt with the thing, the statue. And I believe that God does that sometimes in our lives. I think He deals with the habit or the substance or the whatever it is that we're depending on. And I think sometimes it's financial. I think sometimes it's your career. I think sometimes it's in relationships. Sometimes God takes the hands and the head of that thing in your life, and He breaks it apart. He deals with it. But then what we see in verse 6 is that He turns from the thing to the people. All right? So God judging wickedness, and to say that He doesn't tolerate sin means that He's dealing with sinful habits on one side, but then He turns to the people. Now, the hand of God is heavy on the Philistines in the place where the ark is kept. And He says it's Ashdod and all of its surrounding territories. Okay? Now, We do not know exactly what God brought to these people, but we know that it was bad. The men of Ashdod saw how it was. They said, "This must not remain with us, for his hand is harsh toward us, and Dagon our God." So they're starting to believe, right? They're starting to get it. Sometimes the thing that draws people to the Lord is actually his wrath. It's actually his punishment. When we see God doing things that doesn't really feel good or that we're not excited about, sometimes that's the way that he's drawing people to himself. So it was after they had carried it away, the hand of the Lord was against the city with a great destruction. He struck the men of the city, and tumors broke out on them. Listen, you can read all kinds. I don't have time tonight, but you can read all kinds of accounts of what these tumors looked like, what they were, what type. I've heard different ideas. I've heard that it could have been the bubonic plague. I've heard some other things that I probably shouldn't mention in public. You can read about them. It sounds terrible, right? Some of it sounds really bad. Some extra biblical authors write about the mice coming from the city and how they were attracted to the tumors of the people. Awful, awful stories. Okay, so here's my question. I don't even know how to ask this. I wrote this down several different ways because I didn't know how to ask it. Why do you... We read stories like this about the Lord. Old Testament, we find out that God did things like this, plagues and tumors and whatever else, right? Do you see that today? Does God work that way still today? Do you think so? In what way? Can you answer that question? Because I've heard this question often. People have asked me, why did God do things like that in the Old Testament? He would kill people for touching the ark. He would punish people. He would open up the earth and swallow people whole, and he would go out in battle. And today it seems different. I don't want to get into dispensationalism or talk about any of that kind of stuff. I'm just asking, do you still see the hand of the Lord working that way today? Some of you said yes. How so? Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Where medicine. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. Okay, go ahead, Mike. Right. Right. Yeah. Well, and one thing that's difficult to teach my children has been difficult is that sickness and disease are the result of sin, but not your sin. You know what I mean? And this is why Jesus had that encounter where he said, they said, "Who has sinned?" I don't even remember the specifics, but who has sinned to make? Yeah, yeah. And Jesus said, "You got it messed up. You're wrong about that." But and so I try to teach my children that. And I think I go back often to creation account and say death, bloodshed, and disease are all the result of sin, original sin. And so everything is cursed. The world is cursed. Humanity is cursed. The earth is cursed. And so I think that God uses that to draw people to himself, sure. And I think what I've often seen is almost a distinction between the way that God worked in the Old Testament, because I don't see his wrath quite the same since the New Testament came. I don't see it as I see it more maybe subtly, and yes, I see it in the things that you're talking about, but sometimes I want God to just be a God of wrath and judge. Not when it applies to me, right? But I mean, when it applies to other people, sometimes I do. And so what matters is that you don't see in these people just pain and irritation. You see actual death. You see people dying because of God's judgment. God's holiness, in and of itself, the fact that God is holy means that he cannot tolerate sin, right? And so what that means for you and for me, and this is the conclusion that I'm coming to, is that God's wrath is inseparable from his holiness. And so I'm not trying to trick you, but I say, we absolutely serve the same God as the Old Testament. And he absolutely is still a God of wrath, because his wrath and his judgment is a part of his holiness. That is the thing that separates him, that makes him set apart. Okay? So whatever the plague is, and I do encourage you to go read about it because it's interesting. Whatever the plague is, the Philistines don't like it. They don't want it. And that's the part that I think most of us can connect with and can, agree with. We can say, yeah, I've been there. I've been in situations that I don't like. It's not comfortable. And I have asked, if you're like me, you have asked, maybe even in a as reverently as possible, you have asked why. Why is this happening? I find myself asking why a lot, maybe more lately than in a long time. Not that I'm going through anything specific, but I'm learning that almost in my prayer life, to say, God, why do things happen this way? Why is it like this? You know, what the Philistine leaders know that you and I can tell from this passage is that they have attributed these plagues and these diseases and these deaths to the presence of not God, but the presence of the ark of God, right? And that seems to be where they've messed it up, is that they think that it's still in this symbol. They think that it's still in this box, right? They know it is the hand, that's what they call it, the hand of some God, or the God of Yahweh, the God of Israel, and he is judging them, right? So what do they do to fix it? How do they solve it? Get rid of it, right? Okay. So they decide to deal with the problem by getting rid of the thing that represents the God of Israel, right? The box. When's the last time you met somebody that did not go to church? Today? You ever talk to them about it? Listen, and I've spent a lot of my life, a large percentage of my life, working for churches, and working at the seminary, and going to seminary, and getting a degree from the seminary. And Jerry, you were there for a lot of years. We don't meet a lot of lost people at Mid-America Baptist Theological Seminary. I don't know if you knew that. I don't meet a lot of lost people here, right? You don't meet a lot of lost people working in churches. So you kind of have to go out and find them. You have to go out and look. They're at the grocery store, believe it or not. Some of them work at the grocery store, right? This is really, honestly, one of the reasons that I liked going to my dad's car lot a lot, often, was that there were a lot of lost people at the car lot. When I get to talk to these people, and when you get to talk to these people, I meet folks all the time who grew up in church or had some connection to church. Now tell me why they don't go anymore. Say it louder, Mike. I mean, really, almost always that's the answer, isn't it? Almost always. I rarely meet people who have no connection to church. I rarely meet people who go, I've never been in church, I've never went to church, I don't know anything about it. Most of the time when I meet people, something happened and they've decided that they don't want to go to that place anymore, right? When's the last time you had a bad experience at a restaurant? Was the last time you had a bad experience in a drive-through? Are you going to go back? Not only are you going to go back to a fast food restaurant, you'll probably go to that fast food restaurant again. And you probably will not check your bag before you drive home. And when you get home, your wife will say, "Why don't you ever check the bag?" So what is it? What is it about church that's so different? Linda, Sarah just having their own little conversation back there. What is it about church that's so different? You know, because I talk to people about this often. You know, did you quit going out to eat because you had one bad experience? Well, no. Why do people decide they don't have to go to church? They want to sleep in? Yeah. Redemption Community Church meets at 4 o'clock on Sunday afternoon if you want to go there. They don't want to dress up? Really? Have people told you that? Yes, I think that's it a lot of times is they just got out of the habit. It's easy to get out of the habit of church, I think so. Well, yeah. I think that's even part of what Mike was saying, was that you feel judged. You know, so I spoke to somebody a week ago today who she had a child out of wedlock in a church that she grew up in, and somebody said something or she felt judged, and she hadn't been back. And I said, "How old's your child?" And she said, 14. And I said, "That's been a while." And that's sad. You know what I mean? I wonder if the person that said something had good intentions. You know, sometimes we need to keep our mouth shut. But I think also, I think churches can be judgmental. I think church people can be judgmental. But I think more often than not, it's people being judgmental of us, you know, thinking that we're judgmental. Does that make sense? And so I don't know the balance. I try to figure that out, and I want to help you with it. But that's not what we're talking about tonight. What we're talking about is the reason that people choose to avoid church. And they can say things like somebody hurt them or something happened, but I tend to think it has something to do with conviction. I wonder if it has something to do with conviction. All right, so the only way to escape the pain of sin, the plagues, the tumors, the illness, the consequences for these people was to get rid of the thing that reminded them of the Lord, to get rid of the thing that represented the God of Israel and his presence, okay? So, what if you wanted to do that today? What if you wanted to avoid feeling guilty? What if you wanted to avoid having to deal with sin in your life? What if you wanted to avoid allowing God working in your life? What would you do? Here's why I say this. Because so much of this passage is about them taking the Ark of the Covenant and sending it here and sending it here and sending it here. And everywhere it goes, plagues follow. And so I've always heard this message taught with, God judging wickedness and God dealing with sinners. But what if any one of these groups of people had said, "Hey, let's keep it here. Let's look into worshiping this God. Let's call the Israelites and say, hey, when this thing came here, everybody got sick. Why? What does that mean?" Because here's the thing. If you come to church and you meet Jesus, all your problems are not going to be solved. You know, I mean, like in an earthly sense, right? The physical things and the stuff that you do, because life can still be difficult. But we try to convince people that you want to get on the other side of it. Come to church. I know it's not going to be fun for a while, and you're going to be confronted with sin, and you're going to have to deal with it, and you're going to have to give your life over to Jesus, and that's going to be hard. But what's on the other side makes it worth it, right? To live a life that made sense, to know Jesus, to get to go to heaven. So the Philistines recognize the problem, but they deal with it incorrectly. And I just wonder if that's the world that we live in today. I wonder if that's the world that we see every day, is that people know the problem. They might even know something about the solution, but they just really don't want to confront it. They don't want to deal with it. Yeah. That's right. People want to blame God. Right. Yeah. And I think maybe it's living in the South, but I've never met anybody that didn't want God in their life. I've never met anybody. You may have. You may have met some people who are, maybe true agnostics or don't believe in a higher being, It's one of the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? That you recognize a higher being. Is that how they put it, Bob? Higher power? Mike, is that how they say it? Higher power? All right. So I've come to the conclusion that most people want to serve something outside of themselves. They want a higher power. You know what I mean? They want a God or a Buddha or a whatever. They want to work for something, okay? And so it seems like everybody wants God in their house. They want some semblance of God or higher power or higher being, whatever you want to call it. It could be logic, you know what I mean? It could be all kinds of things that we can worship. Everybody wants to be connected in some way, but the problem that the Philistines have, and I think the problem that a lot of people have today, is rather than deal with God and let God change your life, it's easier just to push it out to a safe distance. Even though you have some connection to it, don't let it get too close. Because when the real God shows up, there is conviction, there is a change of life, right? So here are the options. Choose Yahweh. These are the options for the Philistines. Choose Yahweh, but that changes everything about their life. You remember we talked about the priests would have to go around and tell people that Dagon was false, and they would have to clean it up, and they would have to explain how for the past however many years, everything that they've done was wrong. Everything that they've said, everything that they promised. They have to deal with that. Now, that's the way many of us meet Jesus today. We meet Jesus and we realize that whether we've spent 10 years or 20 years or 70 years living for ourselves and living for our own, purposes, we're going to have to say that all of that was wrong. We messed up. I got to give it over to the Lord, right? That's option one. They don't want to do that. There's too much to lose if they leave Dagon on the floor, right? I mean, what about the finances that were involved? What about the system that they had in place? The way that people gave to the church or the way that they supported the priests who worshiped Dagon, they've got to deal with all those things. It's going to change the way that we do everything. All right, so here's the other option. Follow Dagon. Continue following the false god, even though you know that it's false. You know that it can't fix your problems. Just do that. But for a lot of people, that's easier, isn't it? It's easier just to keep doing what you're doing. Maybe it's more comfortable. Does God hear the prayers of unsaved people? Think so? Anybody disagree? Me too, Mike. You want to say why? I've never asked him about this, but I'd like to hear what he says. That may be right. That's a good way to say it. Yeah. Yeah, and I think what? Yeah, I think we all agree, though. We know that God can hear everything. We know that God's omnipotent and omnipresent, and so that's not really my question. But what I say to people often is who ask me that question is, who are they praying to? If they don't know who they're praying to, then maybe they're praying to the wrong God. You know what I mean? Because if you don't know the Lord or you're seeking to know Him, then it's not going to work. But so yes, what you said was a lot of times people pray and bring things to Him because they think He's just going to fix all their problems, right? That's right. So we're faced with these choices, right? It's comfortable. We have to change our routine. A lot of times people just don't want to change. And I mean, it is difficult to change your behavior. It's difficult to change your routine. If you have gotten into the habit of sleeping in on Sunday, I imagine it's hard to get up. It's hard to get up and do that, right? So here's what they do. Regardless of how patched up Dagon looks, they brush him off, they pick him up off the floor, they cement him together, and they declare the threshold to be holy. Remember? We talked about that last week. And this is, again, I think this is what people do every single day, is it's so much easier in their minds to just live your life the way that you want to live it, that we continue to brush it off. We continue to patch up the holes. We continue to do repairs and ignore what has happened. We like the idea. Listen, I think most people like the idea of a Bible in their house. Most people like it. Did you ever have the Bible with the hologram Jesus on the front? Did y'all have that one? Did you? We did. We had the real big one at home. You don't remember it? The real big one. With Jesus on the front, everywhere you walked, it looked like He was looking at you. You remember? That's creepy. Not Jesus is creepy, but that sounds creepy. She said they had a picture of Jesus where everywhere you moved, it looked like it was looking at you. Go ahead, Mike. What were you going to say? Right. Right. Yeah. Well, I think everybody wants some semblance of God in their life as long as you don't have to change anything. And I think everybody wants a Bible in their home as long as they don't have to live by it. You know what I mean? It's fun to wear Bible verse T-shirts. You know, you can buy those on Shein right now. You can. Faith over fear. You know, you can get that kind of stuff. It's fun to wear those shirts just as long as it doesn't have to change your life, you know, as long as you don't have to act on it. All right, so here's the breakdown. Here's the breakdown of the passage. 3 acts. Acts 1, Yahweh defeats Dagon. And I want you to see that in light of your own circumstances in your own life today. God can defeat and will defeat my false gods, our idol worship, the things, the small things, the stuff that we put before Him. God can defeat those, because I read this passage and go, why would they even think that Dagon was a real thing? I mean, why? It's just a statue. We could have physically watched them build it. Well, God can defeat that thing, whatever it is in your life that you've put up, that you've built. Act 1, Yahweh defeats Dagon. God defeats Dagon. Act 2, God takes on the Philistines, not just their idol worship and their pagan worship, but the Philistines as a whole. He starts dealing with the people. And I think that's the way that he deals in our lives. He starts with our stuff, and then he moves on to the people. And then here's Act 3. Act 3. Therefore they sent the ark of God to Ekron. So it was, as the ark of God came to Ekron, that the Ekronites cried out, saying, they have brought the ark of Israel to kill us and our people. And so you see the same thing happen again. And then we're not going to make it tonight, but Act 3 is Yahweh rides out in victory. He leaves. He makes it. And here's what I want you to see. In Genesis chapter 3, God, in the curse, he said that something was going to happen. Remember? He said, and I think there's a play on words here. He said that one day the seed of the serpent would bruise the heel of the seed of the woman, right? But what else would happen? The seed of the woman would crush the head of the serpent, right? Now think about this. For the Israelites and for Samuel, they know that prophecy. They're looking for it. You and I have this privilege of knowing who Jesus is and what Jesus did. You and I know that the head of the serpent was crushed on Calvary, right? We know that that's what happened. We know that Jesus' heel was bruised in a sense, right? That he was hurt, that he went to the cross. It appeared at the cross of Jesus that Yahweh had been defeated, right? But in the end, we know the story. Now let's go back to the first rival. It wasn't the Israelites and the Philistines. The first rival was Satan and God. That was the first rivalry, the first battle. And in Genesis chapter 3, I wonder if the people of Israel in 1 Samuel chapter 5 were thinking that God's prophecy had now come true, because it seemed like Yahweh had lost the battle. The ark of God was now in captivity. It was in the house of Dagon. And in order to win that battle, the statue of Dagon is physically torn down and the head is crushed. The head breaks off, right? This rival of Israel, Israel's people, ends up on the ground with his head cut off. And so God's apparent defeat, what I would call the bruising of his heel, is now his victory in crushing the head of his enemy, Dagon. Okay, so that's 1 Samuel chapters 4 through 6. We kind of see, I don't know what the Israelites were thinking. I think it's interesting that they see this word picture, that they don't, that they talk about it a little bit. We'll catch up next week in chapter 6, and we'll see where the Ark of the Covenant is returned. Send away the Ark of the God of Israel and let it go back to its own place, so that it does not kill us and our people. For there was a deadly destruction throughout all the city. The hand of God was very heavy there. That's the phrase that we continue to see in this passage. If you feel like the hand of God is heavy on your life tonight, he may be trying to tell you something. All right? Okay. Any questions or thoughts, comments, anything I missed? Go ahead, Miss Jeannie. That's great. Yeah. That's good. Yeah. That's not a good prayer. What does it mean to be a good prayer? Yeah. That's great. That's good. Yeah. God gives you those opportunities, and it feels like it might be easier when people are in your house, they visit you. But I mean, hey, you were at Ave Maria for several weeks. Plenty of opportunity to talk to people. Yeah, God gives you opportunities. That's right. What Jenny said was, don't pass up opportunities to tell people about Jesus. Amen. Thank you. Thank you so much. We had a sweet family join Sunday. You may have seen them. That's the family that Ira and I met with last week in his home, and led the daughter and the mom to the Lord. And so they came and joined Sunday. I'll introduce you to them next time they're here. No big deal. But don't pass up opportunities. That's right. Okay. Good. Thanks so much. Let me take a couple prayer requests. Is the camera still on back there, Carter? Can you make it not be on anymore?